I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling as if my insides were nothing but shards of broken glass. The silence felt deafening. It wasn't just the end of a relationship that had shattered me. I felt like my entire sense of reality had crumbled. What had happened to me? How did a love story become a battlefield inside my own mind? For weeks, I couldn't stop asking why everything hurt so deeply. Was it really just about another person walking out of my life, or was something much deeper unraveling in the dark corners of my soul? Looking back, I saw how invisible forces, psychological patterns I'd never even named, were shaping everything. If you've ever found yourself lost after something that seemed beautiful fell apart, if you crave to understand why pain cuts so deep, and what it really takes to heal, you're not alone here. Like this video and subscribe to join our journey into the depths of the human experience, where together, we search for meaning, even in what breaks us. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I believed I'd finally found the kind of love that songs are written about. It started innocently enough. The text messages that made me laugh in the middle of boring afternoons, the late-night conversations that felt like steps into an intimate universe built for two. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought my heart had always been searching for. We'd meet at a tiny coffee shop, and time felt suspended. It was as if the world's noise faded away whenever he looked at me across the table. In those early days, I felt lighter, filled with hope again, like I could finally rewrite the story of all the failed relationships in my past. Sometimes, I caught myself simply smiling for no reason as I replayed our conversations or remembered the warmth of his hand in mine. Maybe you felt that too, the anxious hope fluttering in your chest, believing, at last, you're truly seen and cherished. There was an aura of perfection, almost magical, about those first few weeks, one that made everything before in my life seem suddenly gray. I introduced him to my friends, my family. They liked him. My parents said I seemed happier, more at ease. I thought, this is what it looks like when it works. But in hindsight, there were small signs, whispers in the background that I ignored. A passing comment here, a subtle look there, a little jealousy when I mentioned an old friend, a joke that didn't really feel like a joke. I told myself everyone had bad days, that love meant embracing imperfections. So I pushed down any flicker of doubt, choosing instead to focus on the flood of affection. Everything seemed perfect, but I didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The illusion began to break in moments so subtle, I almost missed them. It started with criticisms that felt playful at first, a comment about my outfit not being as flattering, a suggestion that maybe I talked too much at that dinner party. I'd laugh them off, making excuses for why he might be stressed, rationalizing that honesty was important if we were going to last. But then, the criticism grew sharper, more frequent. I started second-guessing myself before we went out. Would he like this dress? Maybe I should speak less. I began to shrink so slowly around him. It was like watching frost forming on a window pane, barely noticeable, until suddenly everything felt cold. Arguments emerged, often sparked by things I never could have predicted. I'd find myself apologizing, sometimes with tears I couldn't control, for things I didn't truly understand. Every apology felt like a small surrender, a way to keep the peace. He'd reassure me later, say he just wanted what was best for me, for us. But somehow, I always felt smaller after those conversations. I craved his approval like air, and when I didn't get it, anxiety would eat at me for hours. There were nights I lay awake, replaying every word, wondering if I was too sensitive or just not enough. The emotional roller coaster left me exhausted. When things were good, they sparkled with the same intensity as in the beginning. But when things turned sour, it was like being cast into a storm, powerless and alone. He liked to say I was overreacting, that my emotions were too much. On social media, we were the perfect couple, smiling selfies, heart emojis, comments about how lucky we were. But behind closed doors, I was losing pieces of myself. My friends noticed I was withdrawing. My voice on the phone grew quiet. Sometimes, I recognized the disconnect, but it was easier to blame myself than admit the truth. I was afraid of losing him, afraid of the emptiness that seemed to loom beyond his presence. I felt trapped in a cycle, of hoping things would go back to how they were, of fearing I would never be loved again, of doubting my own thoughts and feelings. I couldn't understand why I kept repeating the same patterns, why I stayed despite my unhappiness, why each attempt to break free felt almost physically impossible. I was sinking deeper, lost in a maze I couldn't understand, but the reason for this wasn't just outside me, it was also hidden within. It was during this time, barely functioning, my self-confidence in tatters, that I stumbled upon a quote from Carl Jung. "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." I remember reading those words over and over, letting them echo inside the hollow ache I carried. What if the pain I felt wasn't just about him, or about me being broken? What if it was about deeper truths I'd never faced? Jung's concepts of the ego and persona began to make sense of things. The me I presented to the world, confident, witty, put together, was my persona, a mask shaped by what I thought others wanted. I realized that in this relationship, I'd contorted that mask to fit what he needed, believing love meant changing myself. But my true self, my ego, was withering behind that facade. I'd lost touch with what I really wanted and felt, terrified that letting the mask slip would mean rejection. But even more powerful was Jung's notion of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we are ashamed of or deny. The more I tried to please him, the more I disowned my own anger, my needs, my intuition. I wanted to believe I was good by making everything work, but I ended up suppressing the very parts of myself that were screaming for protection. My shadow, my hidden rage, my fear of abandonment, my deep sense of unworthiness, was growing stronger because I wouldn't acknowledge it. Projection was at play too. Jung explained how we unconsciously project our own rejected traits onto others. In hindsight, I saw how I projected my hopes for salvation onto him. I made him the hero who would heal my wounds, the one who would finally make me feel worthy. Yet, when he disappointed me or withdrew affection, I projected all my insecurities and self-blame onto him, seeing him not as a person, but as a mirror of my own inner turmoil. I also started to notice complexes, emotional triggers rooted in childhood. Every time he distanced himself, it was as if an old wound ripped open, a primal panic I remembered from being a little kid, desperate not to be left behind. My reactions often felt outsized for the situation, and now I understood why. Those moments tapped into a network of unresolved pain, a complex Jung insisted we all carried in our psyches. The dance between our personas, the masks we both wore, created a relationship that looked perfect externally but was hollow inside. Everything was performance, careful and calculated. The more I clung to the image, the more I lost my authentic self. It was as though some archetype from the collective unconscious was driving us, a repeating myth of savior and victim, lover and beloved, a drama much older than either of us. Realizing all this was a ray of light breaking through, but also terrifying. Because if the struggle was this deep, it meant healing would take me face to face with all the parts I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Understanding why this was happening was the first ray of light, but the journey of breaking free was just beginning. The crisis arrived with a kind of brutal clarity. It was a night like any other, an argument that spiraled, accusations thrown like knives, me crying and him coldly telling me to grow up. But that night, something snapped inside me. I saw myself from the outside, begging, terrified, compromising boundaries I didn't even know I still had. I felt the humiliation burning through my skin. But in that moment, it wasn't about him anymore. I glimpsed, for the first time, how I was complicit in my own pain. I was trying to earn love by erasing myself. And suddenly, a memory from my childhood surfaced, a night spent crying in my room after my parents fought, vowing to be good, so that nobody would leave. All at once, I realized I wasn't just fighting his criticisms. I was trying to fix an ancient wound, repeating a pattern so embedded it felt like fate. My tears stopped abruptly. For the first time, instead of reaching out to him or blaming myself, I just sat with the pain. I let myself feel it, raw and undiluted. In the aftermath of that night, I woke the next morning differently, exhausted, yes, but also alive in a way I hadn't felt for years. I saw how the pattern wasn't just in him, but in me, how I was called to confront my shadow head-on. I decided to seek therapy, something I'd always told myself I didn't need. I started journaling, not just about the relationship, but about my dreams, my anger, my forgotten desires. It was messy and scary, peeling back the layers I'd stitched together to keep myself safe. I realized that true healing, as Jung described, required a journey into the unconscious, a willingness to descend, like Dante, into my own depths. In that moment, everything changed, but the path out of the darkness required facing parts of myself I never wanted to see. The journey of overcoming was anything but linear. There were days I'd feel hopeful and days I'd plunge back into despair, missing the comfort of the familiar, even if that familiar was toxic. But slowly, painfully, I began to rewrite my internal narrative. Therapy taught me to recognize when my complexes were triggered. I learned to pause in those moments instead of reacting blindly, to ask myself whose voice I was really hearing, his, my childhood self's, or my own. I revisited old dreams, both literal and metaphorical. Jung said dreams were a royal road to the unconscious. In one, I wandered through a shattered cathedral, sunlight streaming through broken windows while I swept up pieces of colored glass. The symbol was clear. I was beginning to reclaim the fragments of my spirit, crafting something new from the ruins. I wrote these images down, letting them become guideposts along the difficult terrain of change. Setting boundaries became my daily practice, awkward and guilt-ridden at first. I learned to say no, to risk conflict, to reclaim my place in the world without apologizing for it. Each tiny act of self-assertion was a fight against years of learned helplessness and self-betrayal, my shadow's persistent pull. But as I integrated these rejected pieces, my anger, my need for respect, my longing for real intimacy, I felt a strange new peace take root. It was the process Jung called individuation, the integration of all our disparate parts, a journey toward wholeness. I stopped looking for salvation in someone else. I began to recognize my projections and call them home. When loneliness struck, I tried to meet it not with desperation, but with curiosity. What was it trying to teach me? What part of myself was it pointing toward? Healing wasn't always pretty. There were relapses, text messages sent in moments of weakness, waves of regret and shame. But over time, I started to cherish solitude, rediscovering long-neglected passions and friendships. The version of me that once begged to be loved at any cost became a voice that insisted on respect and authenticity. The pieces of shattered glass were slowly coming back together, but the true strength came from accepting every single fragment. Now, looking back on that broken relationship, on all the tears and confusion, I see it for what it was, a call to consciousness. Jung taught me that we are not just victims of circumstance but active participants in our own stories, sometimes sabotaging ourselves, sometimes seeking our own healing through the strangest, most painful lessons. The outcome is not a return to who I was before, but an emergence as someone both scarred and strengthened. I learned that love isn't found in sacrificing my truth for someone else's comfort. Real connection springs from two people willing to meet, not just mask to mask, but soul to soul, aware of their own shadows, responsible for their inner wounds. I learned to honor my anger as a signal, not a flaw. I learned that wanting to be loved is not my weakness but a universal human longing. Understanding my own psychological landscape helped me break the cycle, step by trembling step. This was my journey. What part of it resonated most with yours? Share your reflections or a moment of aha about your own struggles or relationships in the comments below. Your story can illuminate someone else's path. If this story and its insights spoke to you or might help someone you know navigating difficult relationship dynamics or personal patterns, please share this video. Let's build a community of awareness. If this deep dive through a real story brought value to your understanding, give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next explorations into the human psyche and stories that teach us about ourselves. If this narrative and its psychological unpacking significantly impacted you, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support is vital in allowing us to continue sharing these powerful stories and Jungian insights. Carl Jung once wrote, One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. My darkness was my teacher, and by facing it, piece by piece, I found the path from brokenness to becoming whole again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May you, too, find meaning in your own depths and emerge stronger, more complete, and unafraid to face every part of yourself.